Yep.
Okay, everyone, we got a Futurism episode. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of innovations potentially in terms of healthcare, energy, and some other stuff. Where are self-driving cars? That's my main question. That's what I want to get to. And episode 297 of the Think podcast. I, as always, am your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing great. Forget self-driving cars. I still want flying cars. And hey, I got my second Trump shot today, so now I am fully vaccinated. Thanks, Donald Trump.
Oh, God. Nate Myers, Development Coordinator at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
That is I. I'm well. I'm doing good.
Fantastic. And our special guest of the evening, or whenever you're watching this, is Ed Hudgins, Heartland Institute Fellow and founder of the Human Achievement Alliance, joining us from VR World. How are you, good sir?
That's going to be the future. Hi, guys. Great to be with you again.
As long as it's not the Matrix, I can deal with it. You know, if it's like Ready Player One or something, I can wrap my head around that.
That's what I was thinking.
Right over here. I was just watching that one.
So we've had you on before, Ed. We talked about a number of topics relating to tech and futurism, and I've got a lineup of topics spanning the future of healthcare, energy, travel, space, depending on if we have enough time to get to it, that I want to discuss with you. But before we get into any of that, can you just kind of fill us in on your background in this arena, and as well as kind of what the Human Achievement Alliance is?
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I mean, my background has been public policy since the late 1980s. Heritage, Cato, the Atlas Society, as in Atlas Shrugged, the Joint Economic Committee, and an area of interest always to me has been technology. I mean, technology is what has created our world and continues to create our world. Actually, I spoke incorrectly. It's entrepreneurs and individuals who have used technology, has created technology and used technology to create the incredible world we have, including the broadcast we're having right now. This is remarkable. But my insight is this, that exponential technology today in communications and information, biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, artificial intelligence can potentially open up a future of prosperity and long, healthy, even transhuman lives for everybody. It'll be as profound, if not more profound, than the Industrial Revolution. But there are several problems. Problem number one is you have a lot of pushback from people worried that robots are going to take our jobs and AI is going to, dominate us, and we're going to have bioengineered, soulless zombies that are our rulers. A lot of this is coming from the left. Interestingly, it's based on sort of Marxist assumptions. The other thing is that our institutions are incapable of even meeting current needs, much less future needs. For example, the government-dominated schooling system is so detached from the real world that even before the pandemic, there were 1.6 million more job openings than there were unemployed Americans because of this complete disconnect. We have a Food and Drug Administration, for example, that was set up in 1962, and even with the sort of reforms that have been made, it still takes something like 10 to 12 years at a cost of $3 billion to bring a new product from research lab to market. A lot of that is because the system currently is antiquated. I mean, we had vaccines ready to be administered, for the COVID virus, months and months before the FDA finally got around to administering them. I happen to know that our former president, Mr. Trump, leaned on the FDA and basically said, you're going to get this done or else. Anyway, what we want to do with the Human Achievement Alliance is to raise consciousness about the incredible potential of technology to replace in our culture the nihilism and the pessimism and the anger with optimism and joy and achievement and purpose, and to have a Human Achievement Day to work on these reforms that are absolutely necessary to usher in this incredible future. And I'll be doing a lot of that, I hope, through the Heartland Institute, where you can read my wonderful papers on the Food and Drug Administration. Everyone go to Heartland. Everyone support Heartland. Very important, very important.
You talk about warding off the dystopian future of soulless bioengineered things. Have you been on TikTok?
Well, I think my kids have been on TikTok. My 10-year-olds, and we have to keep an eye on.
I'm kidding everybody.
I
I'm
know,
kidding
I know.
everybody. All right. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the listeners and my colleagues here, they'll know that I'm super into this future tech and the potential game-changing nature of it. I've read a lot of Ray Kurzweil. It fascinates me. So I want to start off with a sentence that you wrote in a piece that we're going to talk about a little bit later. It says, "The exponential technology of the information and communications revolution took us from typewriters, physical newspapers, and a few broadcast TV channels to the then unimagined now reality of PCs, smartphones, the internet, millions of websites, streaming services, Google, Facebook, Zoom, virtual reality." So I think this is kind of a great place to start to frame the context of this discussion. We all have supercomputers in our pockets. They're capable of doing amazing things, from accessing the internet, taking, editing, and sending high-definition photos and videos, playing games, buying and selling stocks, acting as a GPS, literally hundreds of thousands of other things. And they also make cell phone calls, too. But the point is that this technology was game-changing in virtually every aspect of our lives. And it was unthinkable 15 to 20 years ago. The first iPhone wasn't introduced until 2007, which is kind of like crazy. That's 6 years after 9/11, right? Even the internet, which is so commonplace in virtually every aspect of our lives, didn't really exist until the late 90s. And it didn't exist in its current form until, I don't know, just a handful of years ago, really. So to say that these things are tantamount to a revolution is not an overstatement by any means. So before we get into any of these like specific topics, do you care to expand on that at all, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about exponential technology, what we mean is this. I mean, the Industrial Revolution started a little over 200 years ago and 220 years ago, something like that. But the reforms and the innovations through the Industrial Revolution took decades and even centuries to work their way into the economy, to work their way into the culture, into our institutions. There was time to change and adapt. What you see today with exponential technology is it comes incredibly quickly. You mentioned, of course, the smartphone, which up until 2007 didn't even exist. So what was that, 15 years ago? Not even 15 years ago, right? And now something like 70-some% of Americans have these. That is an incredible rate of introduction. If you take a look at, for example, how long did it take telephones to, be introduced into 50% of homes or 75% of homes? How long did it take electricity to be introduced into 50% of homes or 75% of homes? Go down all the different technologies. And what you see today, smartphones and personal computers are the perfect example, is now instead of taking half century, a century, you're talking about maybe a decade, and in some cases even less. The speed of technology, that's why it's exponential. And that's why I maintain that if you want to be part of the future economy, if you want to prosper, if you want to be healthy and so forth, and if you want to be free, the freedom movement really needs to lead the way. We have to frame our thinking with what is happening and what is going to happen in the years to come with exponential technology. And so when you talk about it as a revolution, wait till you see what's happening with medical improvements, biotech and all. It may end up making, the smartphone, look like a stone tool compared to what might happen in the next decade or two with biotech, for example.
Yeah, go ahead, Nate.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think you're dead on, Ed. To put it in perspective, there was only a 66-year time span between when the Wright brothers flew their first plane and when we landed on the moon. 65, 66 years. And to think that it took us, potentially thousands of years to develop gunpowder and get that worked into society, like Ed was talking, to go from learning how to fly to learning how to operate spacecraft is unconceivable in the span of, 65, 66 years.
Well, I always use the cell phone as an example because of all the things that I listed off. I think it's just like Like, we take it for granted. It's a crazy technology that seriously didn't exist outside of science fiction. Like, if you go back to like the 80s, you know,
Like Star Trek.
It's exactly right. So that's why I always bring up the cell phone as an example. But like, despite this, it seems like other aspects of our lives and other industries are, like, relatively speaking, kind of stuck in the Stone Age. I mean, so those are the things that I kind of want to focus on in this discussion. These industries that haven't gone through the equivalent revolution, and why they haven't, and what the future holds for them. So let's start off with healthcare. So obviously there has been advancements in healthcare and every other industry that I plan on talking about. So hold your comments, people. But we're not bloodletting anymore. You know, we're not making people eat clay to cure their diseases. But you know, we're definitely not anywhere near the future predicted by Star Trek, as Nate mentioned, when it comes to things like healthcare. So, or maybe we are. Ed, fill us in.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to mention something to segue about the smartphone. Is I've seen various calculations, and there's a book I highly recommend. The Future is Faster. The Future is Faster Than You Think, by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. This is their third book. I did a review of their first book. And if you really want to see what's coming, I really highly suggest that you read this or listen to it when you jog if you have an audio version. One of the factoids in this book is that one researcher, I think he's in Japan, calculated that if you wanted all the functionality of a smartphone from, say, 40 years ago, all the services it provides, et cetera, it would be about $100 million worth of value. So literally, you are now 100 millionaire, whatever you want to call that. You are literally a multi-millionaire just holding this thing that 70% of Americans have right now. And so many people take this for granted and don't realize, my gosh, I literally have millions of dollars worth of technology right here in my pocket. That's incredible. But let me get to the question you asked about the medical area. First thing is to recognize that there's been an incredible number of advances building on the information and communications revolution and a lot of materials revolution and so forth. The other point, though, I'll make a sort of a general overview, and we can talk about each point in particular, is that our governmental, regulatory, and social institutions simply are not made to allow for this kind of innovation. When you think about the smartphone, or if you want to go back to, say, the personal computer, or other innovations, it was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, sitting in their garage, without government permission, without government licenses, without going through regulatory agencies, without getting OSHA approval, without getting minimum wage approval, and all of this kind of stuff. It was just them saying, hey, let's give this thing a try. Maybe we can create a personal computer. And Jobs basically being the marketer. Hey, maybe we can make this valuable to other people, right? By the way, Hewlett and Packard started out also in that area, just kind of working out and tinkering in their garage. Permissionless innovation. And they didn't even think about asking permission from anyone. What is that? That's un-American, isn't it? Well, anyway, part of the problem is, for example, we don't have a healthcare system in this country. We have a sick care system in this country. What happens is when you get sick, then Medicare or your insurance company, which you get through your work, because that's the way the government regulations are, unless you have a medical savings account, then you dicker with them over who pays what percentage. Okay, that's the system that we currently have. That's not a healthcare system; it's a sick care system. You wait till you get sick, and then something happens. A real healthcare and the way the insurance is highly regulated, and it's at the state level. And what it does is it hampers and deters innovation, and taking all the incredible breakthroughs in technology and allowing them to be applied to me personally. Let me give you just a quick overview. We now have wearable diagnostics capacity where you can monitor in real time what's happening to my body. But even more, it's not just my pulse and my blood pressure and all those kind of things. Those are very important as well. You can do it with a smartphone. But we can now basically sequence a human genome. It cost $100 million to sequence a human genome in 2001. By the way, from where I am sitting right now in Rockville, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., 5 or 6 miles up the road is where Greg Venter's lab was, where they sequenced the human genome. That's right over here. I'm happy to be in the neighborhood. It took $100 million without including capital costs in 2001 to sequence a genome. 2007, it cost about $10 million. Today, you can do it for under $1,000. I just saw one company that I know of that's offering it for $500. So you sequence your genome. So now you have all the information about your propensities for certain diseases, your genetic makeup of where there might be problems, where you might have high cholesterol, or you name it. You have all that information now. Now imagine having a supercomputer that can look at that information in real time, monitor you, and basically tell you you're at risk right now for this, that, or the other. Or if you're about to have a heart attack and the supercomputer is real time monitoring you and looking at your genetic makeup, the medics are to your door before you even have the heart attack.
Right.
And a supercomputer is, but it's even more profound than that. Because what you would be doing is having enough information about yourself that you can probably head off that heart attack to begin with. And one of the ways you do that is through, for example, the emergence of the genetic editing, especially the CRISPR-Cas9 genetic editing tool, which we can talk about a little bit later. So if you know that you have this propensity for dementia, for something like that, you can probably head it off. That's a healthcare system, not a sick care system.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about the gene editing thing, because this was the first thing that you kind of brought to my attention when I suggested that we do this podcast. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, because I have a couple specific questions, I don't know if it's like your headphones or what, or maybe the cord or something, but there's a little bit of a crackling that happens when you're extra gesturing. So
I'll be careful.
Yeah, just for the sake of our,
I'm half Italian, so I have to talk.
Oh, I fully understand that. I fully understand that. But yeah, so the first thing that you had brought up is this idea of genome sequencing and CRISPR. And I started to do a lot of research on this for this podcast. I found a Wall Street Journal article that referred to it as a new era of genetic medicine. Beyond that, I was admittedly lost. So I assume that maybe a lot of people are in the same boat as me when they're hearing about these things. So maybe we could take a step back. I've heard of the idea of genome sequencing. I know that it's a process that was hugely expensive in the past, and that was way more in the realm of possibility. But let's just start with the basics. What is genome sequencing?
Okay, what is this? Each cell and our DNA is a genome. It's basically the code that means that if a clump of cells, particular clump of cells grow to maturity, it's going to be a human being, as opposed to a clump of cells that is basically a code that will grow into a tulip versus a clump of cells that will grow into a giraffe. Okay, that's what your genetics is. Your DNA. It's basically the code that tells the biological processes grow this way, create hands, create lungs, as opposed to create petals or whatever. Okay. It's the code that makes up all life. That's what a genome is. But each person's genome is going to be expressed in a unique way. Think of it this way: your genome is like the keys to a piano. Okay, and it basically determines that you're going to grow into a human being as opposed to a giraffe or something like that. But how the keys are played determines what kind of music comes out. So while I have the same basic keys as all of you in terms of growing a head and so forth and so on the other hand, how the genes express themselves and all the particulars are very different. So I might have a different color hair than you have, different shaped ears and so forth.
Far more handsome.
Well, I'll let my wife make that judgment. That's that's an aesthetic conversation. So that's what the genome is. It's that code that we all have, but the way the code expresses itself is different in every single individual, because you're talking about billions of little determinations in that code about your shape of your ears and the color of your eyes and propensities for illnesses and diseases, which is what you're getting to when you talk about the genetic editing tool.
Yeah, so then the genetic editing tool, so CRISPR, and I never like paid super close attention to this, but I remember hearing stories in the past about like this technology possibly being used to by potential parents to like pick their baby's eye color and or pick their hair color or something like that. But when you brought this to my attention, again, when I asked you to be on the podcast, you were talking about the potential to like turn off the switch that causes Alzheimer's.
Yes. Yeah. What CRISPR is basically a kind of a bit of, you might say, genetic DNA or code. I think it's produced in bacteria that initially was used to literally go into genetic material and slice out a little sequence of DNA that might be causing, for example, some kind of problem in you. And that's so-called CRISPR 1.0. And the thing is, when you cut out a little chunk of DNA, well, maybe it's going to prevent some kind of a disease, but it may have side effects. We're not sure. But the latest manifestation of CRISPR is even more profound. What it is this. This genetic tool is now being experimentally used to go in and to turn off how a gene is expressed or how genetic material is expressed, to put that in English. And this is what I saw an article a couple of months ago, I guess a month and a half ago, about. They're experimenting with this tool to go into a neuron. Our brain are made up of millions and billions of neurons. To go into the neuron and to turn off how the production of what's called tau protein is expressed. In other words, so that the neuron will not produce tau protein. The reason that's important is that it's a clumping of tau proteins in your brain, among other things, that causes Alzheimer's. So imagine a tool that's being experimented literally right now by researchers, where you can go in and turn off Alzheimer's. Or, for example, in the Wall Street Journal article that you referenced, there's discussion. They started out with a woman who I think had very high cholesterol and had a heart attack in her 30s because of the production of cholesterol in her body. And so now the experimentation is using this particular gene editing tool to go in and essentially you create a whole bunch of these things and inject it into your body. And they go in and basically turn off the production of cholesterol or certain kinds of cholesterol, maybe in your liver or wherever it's produced. So in other words, we're experimenting with a technology that instead of waiting till you have a stroke, until you have a heart attack, until you have dementia, and go down till you have sickle cell anemia, go down all the genetic problems, that you have a propensity for, going in and heading them off before they ever express themselves.
Right.
You want to talk about a revolution. That's literally what we're talking about, literally in laboratories. And what I like to talk about for those of you, anyone listening to this podcast is obviously an enlightened person. You don't get all your information from the evening news or from the, or those kinds of media. How many of you on the evening news, how many people listening, well, hopefully you don't want to pay attention to the evening news, actually saw these kind of breakthroughs? We have people in the streets tearing down statues of our founders. Why not erect statues to the people who are making these incredible breakthroughs? And making sure, and then basically stepping back and saying, do we have a Medicare system? Do we have an insurance system that is going to allow these breakthroughs to be, to allow, innovators and entrepreneurs to take these breakthroughs and create a whole new system where Ed Hudgins doesn't have to worry about Alzheimer's? Or are we going to have a system that says, nope, that's just not the way it works. I'm sorry. We have it this way and this way and this way. And you're not going to be rewarded for or paid for, if you get yourself sequenced, and if you hook yourself up to diagnostics and so forth. That's the big discussion that we should be having in public policy. And anyone who wants to be on the edge of sort of political reform, that's what they should be looking at, is ushering in this kind of future by looking at the current failed systems.
Yeah. First off, thank you for the less gesturing. I think that is helping the problem with the clicking. But
Good.
but I mean, it seems like when I read articles like this, it's called CRISPR's Next Frontier: Treating Common Conditions, right, from the Wall Street Journal. To me, it just seems so far out. Like, okay, great, but wake me up when I'm 85 years old, when this technology is actually starting to be put into practice. Am I going to have to wait that long, or is this going to be sooner than I think, this type of stuff?
I'm hoping it's going to be sooner than you think. Again, if we start looking at the institutions, and I'm talking about institutions like Medicare, I'm talking about the way insurance, for example, right now is regulated. If we look at those institutions and policies and allow for innovation, so that you can create a system where I am rewarded if I decide I'm going to do this. And entrepreneurs, of course, have an opportunity to say, hey, we can take all these innovations and create a whole new system that's going to work. Now, by the way, I want to add one other thing. Whenever you talk about a new technology, they tend to go through cycles. First of all, it's, wow, look at the potential. This is really cool, whatever it happens to be. Then there's a sort of, well, it hasn't come quick enough. Yeah, that was a flash in the pan. 3D printing is an example of something where everyone at first said, wow, this is really incredible. This is going to revolutionize everything in the next 3 weeks. They sell this stuff in Best Buy. Isn't this wonderful? Right. And then everything kind of calms down and you don't see anything for a while. But what happens is over time it starts developing, and then you finally see the breakthroughs. And you saw, by the way, there were sort of precursors of the iPad that were produced, I think it was by Microsoft and some of the other companies, and they just didn't work very well, and they were costly and clunky and all, and everyone's forgot about them, right? So you had sort of this, we can have like this little pad like in Star Trek, and then nothing happened and everyone sort of forgot about it. And then Steve Jobs came along and said, hey guys, I finally got it working. And I think that's what you're going to see with these kind of technologies. We're in the research phase. We've got the basics. Let me give you one other example real quick. And that is in April of 2018, a particular, the genome for the enzyme telomerase was sequenced. And why is that important? Well, every single cell you have in your body has chromosomes in it. Chromosomes, of course, basically control the reproduction of your cells. And each chromosome has a little thing on the end called telomeres. They're like the sort of like that little plastic thing on the end of shoelaces for people who still have shoelaces. Right, what happens every time the cell reproduces, the telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter. And when the telomeres disappear, the cells stop reproducing, and you shrink and you sort of wrinkle up, and you age and you die.
Right.
So telomerase is the enzyme that keeps the telomeres growing. So we now have sequenced that enzyme so researchers can start playing around with it and figuring out if there's some way they can utilize it to keep your telomeres growing. You realize what a revolution that's going to be?
The end of aging.
That's 3 years ago. And again,
immortality.
I mean, by the way, there's going to be two sides of that. There's the genetic material, and then it's how they express themselves. And that's where you get the CRISPR-Cas9 thing. It's called epigenetics. But the point is, it's very exciting, and it's going to probably be 5 years, 10 years before you really see the medications and such and the treatments coming out. But they're coming along now because the technology allows us to move so fast with these new breakthroughs.
Yeah, what they'll do immediately, the government's response to that would be like, no more retirement age. You guys can work well into your 400s.
I'll tell you what, if you get rid of Social Security and allow me to put it into an individual retirement account, then that works for me. Okay, I'll be a billionaire. I'll be able to go to Mars in the next 150 years and help my daughters terraform the planet. So I'm looking forward to that, guys.
Right. Help Elon Musk terraform the planet.
Elon's going to take us.
I'm sure that you can talk healthcare for the entire episode, but I want to get into some other topics too. Let's move on to it. Let's move on to energy. So we talk about energy a lot on this podcast. Civilization has been burning coal and oil for 150 plus years. People suggest that the future of energy lies with wind and solar and so-called renewable energy. But as we've shown a million times on this podcast, wind and solar are terrible alternatives to reliable energy. When Michael Moore is agreeing with us, you know the debate is over. And like I prefaced with the healthcare conversation, yes, I know there have been advancements in oil and natural gas and other reliable energies. I get that. But the USS Enterprise is not powered by coal. So, and even when we talk about nuclear power, most of the conversation is dominated by, talk about technology that was developed in the 50s and 60s.
Mhm.
So what, Ed, in your opinion, is the future of energy production, in the future?
Well, okay, a couple of things. I want to start off with nuclear because it's the bête noire of a lot of the left, even though if you take a look at nuclear, you find that compared to other technologies, it's incredibly efficient. If you're worried about carbon dioxide, I'm not particularly worried about that, by the way, but it's very clean in that sense. It's not producing any carbon dioxide. And if you take a look at the usual complaints about, well, look at Chernobyl and look at 3 Mile Island and so forth. Chernobyl was basically communist technology, and come on, you can't trust the stuff, right? Let's be honest.
You mean communism? Yes.
Yeah, or communism. even though apparently American professors in American universities still do that, but again, we're talking about primitive, backward-looking people, not real progressives like us. But one of the things, and this you referenced this as well, is nuclear fusion. That's been something that again has been around, and the idea of nuclear fusion has been around for decades and decades, but they haven't been able to make the breakthrough. And remember, there's two kinds of nuclear power. Nuclear fission is where you basically take atoms and split them, and the energy that comes out is more than the energy that goes in, and you can produce lots of energy that way, which is how you produce an atomic bomb, the early atomic bombs. Nuclear fusion, and you do get radioactive materials as waste from the nuclear fission. But nuclear fusion is what powers the sun. It's basically pushing together two atoms of hydrogen and producing something else, and then the energy that's released is very clean energy and so forth. But it takes a lot of you can do it with an atomic bomb and with a hydrogen bomb. The problem is that, well, it's a hydrogen bomb and it just blows things up. You got to have a controlled reaction. And one of the big problems has been dealing with the heat generated, because you're literally creating a mini sun inside of a reactor. How do you keep that thing in there? And you have so much energy just to create a magnetic bubble to keep it in there so that the whole thing won't melt down. Well, there's more energy going in than is being produced by the fusion. It's not very good, is it? But what you see now is some of the innovations being done can actually disperse or reduce that heat, which potentially can mean nuclear fusion energy that would be really cheap and really clean. And again, that can power the Starship Enterprise, perhaps.
Well, it's super interesting because, the idea of replicating the process that's going on in the sun has been around for 100 years. It's just that people haven't been able to figure out how to do it. Not even Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2.
Dadgummit, you stole my joke. I was going to say we shouldn't do it. I was going to say we can't do it in New York. If Spider-Man taught me anything, it's that don't try to create a fusion reactor in the middle of New York City.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Probably a good point, a good safety point.
But I also know that there's been this long-running joke in the field of fusion energy that it's 20 years away and it always will be. So, I've got this article here, and everything that we talk about is linked in the show notes, but there's an article from Popular Mechanics that is titled, "This Reactor May Have Finally Solved Nuclear Fusion's Biggest Problem." So the article goes on to say, with a revolutionary new heat exhaust system, this is what you were just referencing, Ed, scientists in England might have found the key to unlocking a cooler future for nuclear fusion, and brought the world one step closer to actually realizing the long-promised new frontier for energy. Scientists have worked for decades on different tomahawk reactors, or donut-shaped chambers in which atoms are combined, fused, fusion, to generate plentiful energy. And white-hot plasma can reach 100 million degrees Fahrenheit or more, causing heavy wear and tear on all the components of these reactors. So the article goes on to basically say that they are developing this new cooling system that basically like a tenfold increase in what they've been able to do in the past. And this greater dispersal of heat is potentially making fusion viable in the next 20 years, for real this time. So considering the joke that, you know, we're always 20 years away from nuclear fusion, and the completely justified thought that, okay, yeah, we got over this roadblock, but surely there's another one that we haven't thought about. Are we actually getting close to, in your opinion, to unlocking this potentially revolutionary energy source?
You know, we're probably 20 years away. No, sorry. You know, look, I mean, if I realistically knew, I'd be investing in this thing, and then I'd be doing this from a mansion. I mean, I don't know. The thing is, when you take a look at not only this technology, but other technologies, you see that it's usually bits and pieces that all have to come together at the same time to make it economically viable. And not just, you know, again, like a lot of renewables, as you know, cost more than they actually produce, and it just makes no sense whatsoever. But this is certainly an important step in the right direction. Where it's taking us would be is still open to question. The one thing I would say, though, is this is where you have to be a little bit careful about the mix of how much is being done by the government versus how much is being done by private innovators who are trying to think through ways of applying these breakthroughs and looking at what needs to be done next. And by the way, I want to add, we're talking here about fusion, which is the big thing, but actually there are things in terms of nuclear fission that are potentially even better than what has been done in the past as well, like using these modules of fuel rather than the way they do it right now. China, interestingly, has experimented with these sorts of things. And unfortunately, in this country, because of the anti-nuke hysteria, a lot of these things that could have been producing, you know, cheaper, you know, safer energy over the past decades just hasn't come to fruition because the government is so reactive and backward looking. So what I'm hoping is that you don't have this same kind of hysteria saying, oh my God, nuclear fusion. Well, you know, are we going to have people producing atom bombs in their garage? I don't think so. It's going to be a little bit more.
Right, a scientist with 8 mechanical arms is going to go wild if we let this go unregulated.
Who knows? Yeah, it's just terrible.
You know what? Anyway. I'll take that if we get a masked hero like Spider-Man. I feel like that's a fair trade.
I think so too, but that's my. Okay.
Well, what I find funny, funny and interesting about this whole idea of nuclear fusion instead of fission, and I'm 50 years old. Ed is, I think, a little older than me, and we've been hearing about this technology since we were children in science class. I remember hearing about it back then, and this is. I actually have more faith that something like this can actually work out in my lifetime than I am that solar and wind will be able to keep our economy rolling. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would bet, if I had to bet, you would have to bet on this amazing new technology. I mean, China had it's not just as hot as the sun. China had a reaction that was, what is that? I think Ed, like 18 or 20 times, or maybe it was 200 times hotter than the sun itself.
Yep.
That sounds pretty dangerous to me, but nobody died and they seem to know what they're doing. I think that's really exciting technology for the future, and that's the way you want to go. I mean, I would love to see if Elon Musk. I don't believe in anything Jeff Bezos invests in. I mean, for crying out loud, he bought the Washington Post. That's a bad deal. But Elon Musk, I wonder if Elon Musk will ever get into this kind of technology. Maybe it strikes his fancy, because if he wants to go to Mars, engines powered with this technology might do pretty well.
Yeah.
Let's let him focus on Mars, though. I wanna see people set foot on Mars before I die.
By the way, I'll just add to that, and this is where the technologies are so integrated. When you go to Mars, you're not going to be able to use solar panels, okay, to power your stuff. A lot of people say, well, you can use it on a little robot over there or whatever. But if you're talking about powering settlements, you're going to need nuclear of some sort. That's the reality. By the way, there's a science fiction book called The Far Shore that just came out about a dystopian world dominated by kind of communist Chinese types, and these young people basically escaping from the world and going to Mars. I highly recommend the book to you, but that's one of the issues as well. Can't we use solar? Well, no, you can't use solar. It's not power that doesn't generate enough. You got to use nuclear, folks.
Well, the most Yeah, the most successful experiment on this front happened in China. What I'd like to see, for once, how about the United States steals China's technology for once? I think after them stealing our technology for the last 50 years, I think we're owed one, and we'll take this one. Thanks, guys.
Good. Okay, I'll go for that. And by the way, this segues nicely into Elon Musk and going to Mars too, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. I will just say, to cap that off, that China isn't the only ones that are working on this type of technology. In France, there's an international group of scientists, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that are building the ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, and that is supposedly going to be completed by 2025. So we've got some people on our side that are working on this stuff too. And as I've said before on the podcast, and as a lot of people on our side of the aisle have talked about, that energy is the master resource. Everything is built on it. So if we suddenly had access to limited, clean, cheap, incredibly cheap energy, it would be a game changer for society.
Well, and something that's kind of an interesting point, because energy has really been the motor of civilization since the dawn of time. The original source of that was food. The agricultural revolution is what powered the first civilizations, and it was the very fact that they could rely upon a consistent and abundant source of calories, which is energy. It's what enabled, empires to rise and city-states to be built and all sorts of things.
Right.
Well, the global leftists are all warning us constantly that we're going to have a global war because of scarce resources, that people are going to kill each other over resources, which means energy resources, right? Well, if we did have basically free unlimited energy, well, that would go a long way, I would guess, if you buy their theory, towards world peace. As you alluded to, this, Nate, was why I brought this up, is that every conflict through human history has been about resources, from caveman times on to now. It's like, they have more food than us, let's kill them and take their food so we don't die. Right. To wars for oil and all of that stuff.
That's a similar dispute I had with my neighbors.
Yeah. They have more food than you?
Yeah, so they must die.
That's
Sorry,
because of the lockdown.
Yeah, everybody's gone crazy.
Oh yeah, it was over toilet paper. Now you're ringing.
So you're spearing their toilet paper rolls.
Yeah, no, but the idea, reading about this amazing successful experiment this morning, I was just trying to imagine a world in which oil and coal and natural gas aren't really needed. They're used for different kind of niche products. I mean, people forget that petroleum is not just used for diesel fuel and to put fuel into your SUV. Petroleum is in almost every product we consume these days, especially obviously if there's plastic in it. Petroleum is involved in that process as well. And so we could use the fossil fuels in the ground for even cheaper ways to make products that we need and for lubrication and all that stuff, and then have this unlimited free energy source for everything else. The one thing I thought of, and maybe we can wrap up this part of the podcast today. So I was thinking, okay, I'm not a big advocate for electric cars. I think they're impractical. I think they're actually more harmful to the environment than a gasoline powered car is. But I thought, well, if we did have this kind of unlimited nuclear technology that doesn't produce any waste and is just free and it's easy for everybody, there would be this push to go to electric, but you still have to make these batteries. So you would still need this enormous breakthrough in battery technology to not just make them store longer so you can go more than 300 miles. And frankly, you do have to go more than 300 miles and then stop for 3 hours to charge up your car. That's just not practical for people. And then, so we still have a long way to go technology-wise, Ed. Is there any news on the battery technology front that would make it actually practical if this, fantasy Doc Octopus energy source was to come about?
That's something that I think there's beginning to be a recognition that the battery problem is a serious problem, and not just for Teslas, but for example, I was looking at, would it be valuable for me to get solar panels on my roof here of my house? And I was looking at the cost and saying, well, my electricity bills are fairly high and maybe that would be useful. And then I looked at how much it would cost to buy a Tesla battery to store the stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, this is very bad. I have seen some news about using nanomaterials to make batteries much more efficient, because right now Jim is absolutely right about, and all you guys are absolutely right about renewable. And the problem with solar and wind is that the sun isn't shining all the time and the wind isn't blowing all the time, and so you need something like 8 billion batteries, Tesla-sized batteries, to keep enough backup energy to run things, when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And then you're going to need and you're going to need power also, as Jim mentioned, to charge those electric cars. And Elon Musk has even said we're going to probably have to double electricity output if we're going to power those electric cars. So even he realizes that that's the situation. So what you're going to see probably, if this is going to be reality, you're going to have to see breakthroughs in battery technology, using nanotechnology, using some of these other technologies, because the current batteries, maybe they work if you can afford a Tesla. Maybe it works for some of my neighbors who have the panels, but otherwise it's not going to be economically viable for everyone to have an electric car. And as you say, I don't want to sit around for 3 hours while the darn thing is charging.
Yeah. Forget electric cars. I want my self-driving cars. Where the hell are these self-driving cars? I feel like I've been promised these things for at least 5 years now. And I know that like Mercedes and stuff could have like they have the cars that park themselves. They could do the little parallel parking themselves. Teslas have a pretty cool autopilot thing that people on TikTok are getting in trouble sitting in the backseat of their car while it's driving itself. But that's not what I was promised. I'm talking about like stage 5 full autonomous self-driving cars. So where is this?
Well, I'm sorry to say that we still have a few years, not just because of the battery information for electric cars, but for the self-driving cars. The technology is there, but again, it's the it's the application, and they have had some accidents. I think it was one that was broadcast on TikTok. Some guy driving, it was in the backseat of his self-driving car, and then later he was killed. So that's kind of not very promising for your self-driving vehicle. And again, by the way, Elon Musk, I love the guy. He's a showman, okay? He's trying to gen up enthusiasm. And I want to go to Mars too. I want to do all these cool, neat things. But sometimes he and others overpromise. Remember what I mentioned about 3D printing? 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was, wow, this is the big thing and it's going to revolutionize production. And actually, there are niche markets where it really has revolutionized production. For example, for prosthetics, if someone loses a jaw in an accident or something, you can print exactly that that prosthetic. I can go over a whole lot of things where 3D printing has been incredible, but we still have to see the large scale use of 3D printing, and I think we are going to see that probably in the next 10 years because it's finally reached a takeoff point. But self-driving cars, they're still at level 1 or maybe level 2, let's say. They still haven't reached the so-called level 5 where, again, you can just get in the thing, say, take me to wherever it is, and then take a nap, and you're going to be there. So sorry, guys.
I think a dynamic of this conversation, which I think is fascinating, and to bring it back to kind of the beginning where Nate said we went from the Wright brothers, the Wright Flyer in 1903 to July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin getting out of a lunar lander. I mean, that's amazing. And there were people born and man had not mastered flight, and they saw on television, which had not been invented when they were a child, a man walking on the moon. I mean, the advances of the 20th century were really mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
I mean,
but I think a lot of... Go ahead.
I was going to say, to even make it more mind-blowing, there were people who grew up riding horses that, later on in their life saw the moon landing. So they went from horse and buggies to landing on the moon.
Yeah, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And so the 20th century is amazing. The 21st century, we keep thinking it's going to be more amazing. And like you said, Donnie, the iPhone was only common in people's pockets 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I actually didn't even have my own cell phone until after 9/11. I felt really no need to have one. And then, when you saw those things where people making their last call to their loved ones as they were about to die, it's like, maybe it'd be nice to have one of those in case something like that ever happens to me. But now they're in everybody's pocket. But I think there's this impatience because everything has moved so fast, but it's moved fast in directions that I don't think actually innovate. We're seeing some things. Elon Musk is building a new rocket, but is his technology all that different than what got us to the moon, all those years ago, more than 50 years ago? It's not really. I don't think so. I mean, the concept is still the same. It's still liquid fuel or solid rocket boosters and that sort of thing. And so, we we seem to be impatient. We see this idea, hey, a 3D printer, this is great. We could print anything. It's like, well, it's not practical to print everything.
Right.
There's other ways to do things. The technological advances of the 20th century seem to me were more fundamental and more, we seem to advance on them a lot more quickly in a more practical way. I think, Ed, maybe you guys could all talk about this a little bit. It seems to me our innovation is going sideways, and it's going directions that really don't advance human civilization in dramatic and significant ways. It just kind of makes the things that we already do a little faster, a little better, and then, frankly, a bigger invasion of our privacy. It seems, everything in the digital age seems to be reducing our privacy, but not really advancing human civilization a lot.
Yeah, and Ed, before you comment on that, I know that you're going to have to hop off here pretty soon. So just give me a 1-minute warning, and I'll let you kind of tease anything that you want to promote out there before you hop off. But to Jim's point, we landed on the moon. What was that, 1969, right?
Yep.
If I was sitting in the classroom watching that, I'd think by 2021 we'd have moon colonies by now.
Sure.
Right. So what's the deal?
Well, I've let's see. I got a book about that. There we go. Right.
You got a book about everything, Ed.
I know. What can I say? Okay.
Look at that stuff behind you on the wall. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Okay. But seriously, and actually, my best piece on this is I'm going to be at FreedomFest this year, and FreedomFest 2020 on the anniversary of the first moon landing, the 50th anniversary. I actually gave a talk, and you can see this on C-SPAN, where I asked about going to Mars, but a lot of it was, well, why don't we have lunar colonies, and why aren't we on Mars right now? And a lot of it was because guess which institution dominated space exploration up until the last, say, 5 or 10 years? Well, it was government. And NASA, it's very politicized. And frankly, I mean, you can take a look at my C-SPAN broadcast on that where I explain it. Jim's point, by the way, is a very good point, because technological development is lumpy. Okay. When I say lumpy, I mean this. In some areas, you see, again, smartphones going from not existing in 2007 to everyone has one today. In other areas, it's, well, we're just adding a little bit to what we did before, and that's cool. We like that, but there it is. And by the way, Peter Thiel has a very good book, 0 to 1. And he really kind of talks about that. And he talks about how a lot of folks think they're innovative, but all they're doing is kind of say, well, we can do that too. And just adding a little bit. And especially, for example, in alternative energy and all in the solar, he talks about how these companies all failed because of their approach. But there are areas, and as I say, I think biotech is one of them, where you really do see innovation, being able to turn off the way tau proteins in your neurons express themselves. That is revolutionary. That's a breakthrough. That's not just giving. My poor mom is 89 years old. I saw her a couple of days ago in the assisted living place. She's got Alzheimer's, and it's not very pretty. I mean, she still loves us, but she doesn't know who half of us are. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's not just giving mom a pill to keep it from going a little, developing faster. It's being able to turn it off. That's revolutionary. Right. A lot of the areas in that are revolutionary. Some of the others, it's going to be slower and all. But that's why if you really want to be an innovator, take a look at, for example, what you can do with nanotechnology. Not just, we have these cool things. We do a lot with nanotechnology right now, but there's an area where you really could take and apply and do completely different things, and not just, well, we're a little bit better on our car batteries or a little bit better on our whatever it is.
Ed, do you think that if we were to, through private enterprise, greatly expand our space exploration efforts, do you think that would solve a lot of the conflicts that we have here on Earth? Because, for me, what comes to mind is solving a lot of the conflicts that we have. Because, like Jim had said at one point, a lot of the conflicts in human history, or almost all of them, have been over resources. So, with greater access to, say, the asteroid belts and the outer planets and things like that, that would potentially solve a lot of the resource conflicts that we have here on Earth. Greater access to, water, coal, all sorts of different minerals and materials. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a big space fan, as you may gather from the materials on my wall and my book and so forth. But I think fundamentally the answers are here on Earth. And the problem is that many of our policies have crippled ourselves. For example, we talk about mining, and we talk about how if you want to do renewable energy, well, right now we have mining in China for rare earth elements. We have horrible human conditions mining cobalt in Congo, and we have terrible human conditions mining lithium in South America. We could be doing some of that in the United States. Why aren't we doing it? Well, I fought these battles 20 years ago because the environmentalists were saying, I'm sorry, but you can't do this in Arizona, even though you're not in Phoenix, you're in the middle of nowhere, because it might add 3 atoms of some toxic material to the atmosphere. So let's not do it in the United States. So you drive the production offshore. We have an abundance on this planet. And if you didn't have the regulations that get in the way of production, then we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have the so-called shortages. If you look at most of the shortages, most of them are human caused. When I say human caused, I mean caused by our institutions and by our regulations, not because, well, the technology is not there.
Right.
And that's by the way, for those listening, you want more information on any particular area, take a look at Heartland papers. I edited a lot of them myself, and be happy to point to the particular papers on these things.
Yeah, I don't want to make you late for your next thing that you got going on. So before you hop off, just let us know where people can go to kind of stay up to date with what you are writing and reading about, and where they can find more work by you.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Human Achievement Alliance, you can go to www.humanachievementalliance.org, and you'll see you'll see that I have a Human Achievement Day project that's coming up October 21st, the anniversary of the creation of the light bulb by Thomas Edison. Edison supposedly tried 6,000 filaments in the light bulb, and they didn't work. He didn't consider them failures. They were successes in figuring out what didn't work until he found the right one. So we have a Human Achievement Day coming up October 21st. I'm going to be speaking at FreedomFest this year, so if you've got to go to there. I have 4 policy areas that I think can lead the way to this future I talk about: future medicine and life extension, education revolution, absolutely important, future economy, and the techno path from poverty. Those are the 4 areas you can see. And I want to make one other appeal. We take a look at our culture and we see it becoming more and more polarized with the sort of degenerate postmodernist leftists. And we see a lot of the heads of big tech are basically the problem. Okay. But what I've found in the last couple of years, especially, is that you have a lower, when I say lower level, I mean, it's not Dorsey or whatever his name is at Twitter, who's a lefty. You're basically seeing a lot of honest tech people who are what I call soft liberal, but they really do want the kind of future that we've been talking about here. And they're open to our appeals. Take a look at Abundance and Peter Diamandis's operation. Take a look at Singularity University. Take a look at the Transhumanist Party. A number of them are lefties, but a lot of them are very libertarian. Take a look at the Revolution Against Aging and Death conference, which I'll be sponsoring again this year. There are a lot of folks who potentially are our allies out there, and I'm trying to appeal to them. So feel free to email me as well. Edward Hudgins, you can see it at the Human Achievement Alliance website. And this is exciting, and I'm hoping to do more papers so you can read them at the Heartland Institute, since I am a Heartland Fellow.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us. We definitely want to have you again, because these are topics that I find infinitely fascinating. Thank you again, good sir.
Take care.
So just kind of expanding on what Ed was saying there at the end, when I'm met with stories about the potential of crazy inflation, or even the crazy stuff about the climate change is going to lead to extinction, all of that, whatever is just kind of souring your day. This is the stuff that we just talked about on this podcast that actually makes me optimistic about the future. Any one of these things is a potential game changer. That if we had that breakthrough, the world as we know it that we were trying to plan out for yesterday is going to be totally different.
Yeah.
And when I envision the future, I'm thinking the Star Trek of the world. I've got a more rosy depiction of the future as opposed to the dystopian Hunger Games type things that's constantly pushed on you by Hollywood.
I feel like.
Go ahead, Nate.
Oh, I was gonna say, I feel like the future, especially with space exploration, I think will probably fall more in line with like the show The Expanse. I know Jim knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be utopian, but I think it will certainly turn the world that we live in right now upside down. And I think it will solve a lot of the problems that we have currently, but it will create infinite new problems that we'll have to deal with.
Yeah, no, of course. I don't deny that at all. But like, again, to me, that this is my optimism.
Sure.
This is what keeps me going when I'm in like the darkest phases of my life.
Yeah, and then you see movies or any fiction that talks about when there's a great energy innovation that, hey, I just invented free unlimited energy, and then that person is assassinated by the current regime, right? Big oil or whatever, or maybe big nuke or something. That these people that have these literally world-changing technologies, at the brink. In fiction, these people end up pretty much dead all the time. But the idea, I would love to live long enough to see that. I mean, I think the technology for anti-aging, or that's the fountain of youth, Ponce de Leon, that whole that whole myth, that whole story it's an eternal human desire to not die. It's wired in our DNA. We have to, if it wasn't, our species would not exist,
sure,
as it is for everyone. But the idea that you're going to delay aging or you're going to reverse aging, I think that's very exciting. However, as I told my wife the other day, it's like, hey, did you see the thing about how you can have people live to be 100 or 125? I'm like, well, that's great. That means I'm working till I'm 85. So if anybody wants to take my job, you got a long wait, brother. Well, but just think about how that would change all of society if people live to be 100. Like on average, instead of 70, which it is right now. What does that do demographically to the country? Can we actually survive as a species or as a civilization when people are living? Yeah, how can you sustain growth and wealth when everybody's living to be 100?
Well, and that's what I was about to say, was that like, if we're going to basically eliminate dying, we also at the same time have to advance rapidly with space exploration, because if everyone stops dying, we're gonna have a massive crisis on Earth, because that's are you going to tell people they can't have children anymore? Because you get into really morally gray territory with rapidly diminishing resources all at the same time. So I mean, you would really have to master space exploration and space colonization before we eliminate dying.
Western civilization is already having fewer children. The richer a society gets, the fewer kids they have. We're barely above replacement level in the United States, and we're above most of those in Europe. So maybe this is one of those problems that works itself out.
Yeah, so we are out of time. We're actually a couple minutes over already. But just for our audience, if you like these topics, it's a little bit different than what we talk about on a week-to-week basis. But if you like these topics, let us know. Write a comment or anything like that, because I love this, as I've mentioned a handful of times already. So I would love to do more episodes on this. And if you guys are into it too, then we will do that. But that is going to wrap up the show for today. Join us every Thursday if you're watching on YouTube, or every Friday if you're an audio-only listener, for a new episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us. That'd be fantastic. If you would like, you can send us a comment, question, suggestion for the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely at Awful Socialist Twitter, also at Heartland Inst on Terrible Socialist Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Nate Myers, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying bye-bye to the listeners.
Goodbye.
Thank you all for listening. We will talk to you in